You're listening to the Maritime Gardening Podcast, episode 120, brought to you by Vessie's Seeds. Well, today, folks, we have author Lee Reich with us to talk about growing tomatoes. Who is Lee Reich? He is an avid gardener with graduate degrees in soil science and horticulture. After working in plant and soil research with the U.S. Department of Agriculture and Cornell University, he turned to writing, lecturing, and consulting. Sounds pretty good. He's got a number of books. I've had him on the show to talk about this one, Weedless Gardening, and also, I believe, The Ever Curious Gardener. But he's got other books on top of that, A Northeast Gardener's Year, The Pruning Book, Uncommon Fruits for Every Garden, Landscaping with Fruit, Growing Fruit Naturally, and his most recent book, Growing Figs in Cold Climates. He writes regularly for a number of gardening magazines, and his syndicated gardening column for the Associated Press appears bi-weekly from coast to coast. His garden has been featured in the New York Times and Martha Stewart Living. He's won awards from the National Gardening and Organic Gardening magazines, and has been included in open days tours of the Garden Conservancy. He's here to talk about growing tomatoes. And the reason I got the idea for bringing him on the show, aside from having him on before, reading his books and liking him, was the fact that I was just having one of those days. I said, I wonder what Lee Reich is doing on his YouTube channel. And I just saw this video on pruning tomatoes, and his tomatoes look better than my tomatoes. And I thought, he probably knows more about tomatoes than me. That's the kind of guest I want, people that know things that I got nothing to say, that nothing really good to talk about. So Lee, say hello to our guests. How you doing?
Hello, everyone. And I'm blushing from the introduction. You can't tell because everything looks orange here.
Yeah, that's true. It's very it's like the 70s there, sort of thing. It's got this cool, warm glow. You're making me nostalgic for my youth. How is the weather? You're in New York, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How's the weather there right now?
It's very variable. Today was over 60, sunny and beautiful. And then tonight, the temperature is going to drop, and Friday we're supposed to have a foot or more of snow. And then next week the lows, or I think this weekend, the lows are going to be in the single digits, and the highs maybe in the 30s, maybe in the 40s. It's there's a time of year that non-native plants really don't like. You know, fluctuating winter temperatures are not good for plants.
No, and I mean, I'm trying to translate everything you were saying there into Celsius, but basically you're going down into like minus 20 Celsius and then up above 0 Celsius.
Right.
Back and forth sort of thing.
But now it's 61, which is, what's that? That's
teens. 67 is like 20 Celsius, so you're getting into the, got to be into the teens. I watched your YouTube video called Pruning Tomatoes, and it got me thinking about a lot of questions I still have about growing them. And, you know, I agonize over different strategies every year. I'm the only person in the house that really loves tomatoes in terms of eating them raw. I mean, everybody likes spaghetti sauce and things like that here, tomato soup and vegetable soup with tomato base, all that sort of stuff. But I really, you know, I've never felt in this location that I've really hit my stride with tomatoes. So I thought it would be great to have you on the show and just answer some basic questions that I have, but also I put a thing out on different social media asking my viewers questions they had for you. So we're going to see how many of these we can knock off in over the span of about 40 minutes or so. So
sounds good.
Let's get started. And I guess, go ahead.
I'm poised and ready.
And I guess right before we should start, you should tell people briefly about your garden and the sort of scale that you have a garden on.
Okay, so where my house is used to be surrounded by only 3/4 of an acre, and I had a garden, and I had a few fruit trees, and you know, some vegetables garden, some fruit trees, and I had some flower garden, and then I had access to an acre and 3/4 field just to the south of me, so I bought it. And then instead of like, you know, say I had 3 grapevines here, then I planted 10 grapevines, and then I planted chestnut trees, and I planted filbert trees. So I decided that was not, you know, your average garden anymore, but it wasn't big enough to be a farm, and so I called it a farmden, and it's sort of more than one person can take care of and remain sane. As you might as you might guess from as we talk. But so I grow a lot of, now I have a greenhouse. I grow hardy kiwi vines. I have like 10, 15 hardy kiwi vines. I grow pawpaw trees. I know this is probably a favorite up there, European black currants. That's one of my favorite of fruits. I grow lots of
Wow.
blueberries. I grow 20 plus different kinds of pears, number of different kinds of apples. And then my greenhouse uh, provides me with salad greens all winter.
Right.
Lettuce, arugula, celery. And then in the summer, when it gets really hot in there, I have some fig trees growing in the ground there. So I get figs in late summer.
In the
And
greenhouse.
yeah,
Okay.
well, I also have figs in pots that I protect in winter because I'm in the colder part of zone 5. So it used to get down to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, which is probably, what's that? That's about minus 16 or something Celsius. And but the last few winters, it didn't get nearly that cold, but it still gets. Geez, I should have a conversion chart here. It gets down
That's
to
what
zero.
people can do the math. People Google
Yeah,
it. There we go. That's
yeah,
the
do the
answer.
math.
Google it.
It gets down to 0 degree. It always gets down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit here. So I have to protect figs in winter. But then I'm saying this all to justify the luxury of my having a greenhouse. So I get salad stuff in the winter. I get figs in late summer, and all my seedlings for my flower and vegetable garden I start in the greenhouse in spring. So I get a lot of
Wow.
bang for the buck.
Wow.
So
I'd love to have you, we could do a separate thing on because you grow a lot more fruit than me, and I got 1,000 questions about that.
well,
Um,
when I was in graduate school, my PhD is a focus on fruit growing,
I see.
pomology.
And
And
the
when I
pawpaw tree, because I've never even eaten a pawpaw.
we can't grow it up there. You need heat.
Oh, it needs a hot summer.
Yeah.
Ah, I see.
I grow persimmons also. I wrote a book a number of years ago that's out of print now, but it's going to be reissued on uncommon fruits. And a lot of them you'd be familiar with, like, because they're uncommon here, gooseberry, blackcurrant.
Yeah.
Some you may never have heard of, gumi, medlar. Uh, anyway, why did I get into that? Oh, yeah. So pawpaw and persimmon were two of the fruits that are in the book also
I
that I do.
see. Wow. Okay. So yeah. So suffice it to say, the man has a big garden. Just beyond
Farmed in.
farm den. Yes, that's right. That's the term you've
Trying,
coined.
trying to introduce that word into the English language.
It's possible. I mean, mine is 2,500 square feet. So I mean,
Oh yeah,
it's beyond the typical backyard garden. It is like a farm,
yeah.
a tiny farm.
Actually, my vegetable gardens, I've two outside and one in the in the greenhouse. Totals about 2,500. But I also have all those fruit trees. So
And an
that
orchard on top of that. Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, I'm jealous. Of course, I have a 9 to 5 or so. I think I could still pull it off, but who knows? Anyway, all right. So let's start. And suffice it to say, you also grow a lot of tomatoes and a lot of
I
different
do
types
grow
of
tomatoes.
tomatoes.
Yep.
And it's a real. I'll put a link to Lee's video on. It was just on pruning tomatoes, but I'll put a link to that at the end of this video so people can check that out if they're interested. So my first question is on uh, indeterminate versus determinate tomatoes, pros and cons and considerations for shorter growing seasons. And I guess what I would specifically ask you is, given my situation here, why would I want to grow determinates other than I know there's a wider variety of determinate tomatoes. Sorry, there's a wider variety of indeterminate tomatoes.
Right.
And potentially there's better flavors to be achieved, but yeah.
Yeah, so I believe it, I'm not 100% sure, but I think the only two advantages to the determinate tomatoes are that I think they ripen earlier generally,
Yeah.
and the other thing is that they ripen in very concentrated crops, so that could be an advantage or a for me, it would not be an advantage because I don't want to deal with a whole bunch of tomatoes all at once. and you don't have to prune them either because they grow bushier.
That's right.
But to me, I don't grow any determinate tomatoes.
Right.
First of all,
Yeah.
because I've longer and a hotter season, and as you said, the taste. They don't. The thing is, their leaf to fruit ratio is much lower than for indeterminate tomatoes, so you don't get as much flavor.
So you're saying there's less fruit per leaf,
No, more fruit, less leaf per fruit. So
less leaf.
since leaves make, photosynthesize and make, sugars and other flavor components, if you have less leaf per fruit, you're going to get less flavor.
I see. So yeah, okay. So that makes sense. So would your advice to anyone with a really good growing season, you recommend the indeterminates?
Definitely, 100%.
And if there's a variety of indeterminate that's fast maturing, that I should possibly look into favoring those over I tend to go with determinants because some of them will have like 50 to 60 days to maturity, which is kind of what I'm looking for, because I want to have them. We can get frost in September here, right? And
Wow.
yeah, and sometimes the last frost date is like June 7th.
Wow.
So you have an incredibly crappy growing season, right? Doesn't always happen that way, but it happens, right? Or sometimes the soil just takes, because the soil freezes to ice sometimes, it takes forever for the soil to warm it up enough to put a tomato in it. You plant your tomato and the plant just, because the roots are freezing in this cold soil. So
You need a greenhouse.
yeah, I think so.
Or the other thing is, to grow them in tunnels, just where you get more warmth, and
That's what I do. I have these sort of tunnel things I stick on because it just otherwise, you could have one bad night where they'll just get nuked with the
right.
frost and they're gone, right? I even
Well,
had them.
it's not only for that; it's also because the tunnels, though you can't get more sunlight in them, you can get more heat at least.
They get more heat. Yeah, even on a so-so day, it's a lot warmer in the tunnel than elsewhere.
Right.
That's right. Okay, so and do you have any off the top of your head suggestions of varieties of indeterminates that are quicker growing,
Uh,
or tricks to aside from using microclimates like greenhouses and tunnels, tricks for getting your indeterminates to bear fruit, to bear a yield quicker, like pruning or
I think
topping
that, right. I think that pruning them to the way I do in my video to a single stem, this does promote a somewhat earlier bearing.
okay.
So that's one way. Pretty much they're going to bear, you know, in the time that they're supposed to bear. So it's hard to, without heat or without extra heat, to promote earlier bearing.
All right. Okay. Next question. Planting out transplants, deep planting versus planting them sideways. And by planting them sideways, I mean you plant
Right.
the roots, you sort of lay them in a trench and then bend the
Yeah.
stem up,
Right.
which is that I tend to use that because once it gets too cold once you go down. But is there a reason to do one over the other? Is one always better? Is there some context where you might favor one technique over the other?
Well, to me, the idea is to put a plant in that's not leggy. If it's grown well, the transplant, and so it's stocky, and then you just put the root. If the root ball is that that deep, you make a hole that deep, and you don't have to bend it, or you don't have to bury it really
Right.
deep. So that's the ideal. On the other hand, like you said, where I am, and the soil's nice and warm when it's time to plant tomatoes, I don't think it matters. I mean, tomatoes do grow like weeds.
Yes.
Maybe not where you are, but where I am, they do grow like weeds. I mean, you can take a tomato stem without roots and just stick it in the ground, and it'll root. But since you do have this very cold soil that stays cold, I would say, just like you just said, that doing the trench method would be
Right.
the better way.
Keep them shallow and let them find their own way down
Right, because
after the fact.
yeah, because there's a number of problems. First of all, they hardly grow if the soil is too cold, and also they get phosphorus deficiency because phosphorus relies on root exploration. Phosphorus doesn't come to the root. The root has to go to the phosphorus.
Okay.
So if they don't grow a lot, then they're not going to reach the phosphorus. And it's you know, in a climate that's warm enough, or if the soil, once the soil warms up, then they have enough phosphorus. So it's just a temporary situation. But it's nice to have the plants growing good from the get-go.
And the phosphorus is critical for flowering. Is that
You know, people
correct?
say that, but I don't think that's really true. There's a lot of myths in horticulture, and I think that's something that, you know, people write it, then they repeat it, and other people read it, then they repeat it, and it just keeps going along. I mean,
Right.
you know, plants need balanced fertilizer to grow well and to fruit well.
So they need the phosphorus they need. They don't necessarily need phosphorus to flower.
Right,
I
right.
see. Okay. Yeah, that makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay. Now pruning. How to prune, and does pruning make any sense if you have a short growing season? We sort of touched on that before, but just to reiterate.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I think it makes sense because it will advance bearing, and also it exposes and there are different methods of pruning. The kind I'm talking about, where you have a plant trained to, say, a stake, and you prune it so that this indeterminate plant, the main stem keeps elongating, but it's also trying to make side shoots that could also elongate, and you just maintain that single stem, and you pull off all the side shoots as they develop, and then fruits form on that single stem also. But you get a lot of good air circulation. That's one advantage. Also, they're off the ground, so ground-dwelling creatures can't munch on them as easily.
yeah,
And and the fruit's cleaner.
there's probably you're probably optimizing access to sunlight in that
Oh yeah,
situation,
right.
right? That makes sense. So basically, a tall, skinny plant as opposed to not a Christmas tree
Right.
sort of
And I,
thing.
I, I like the phrase, you're harvesting more sunlight. The plant can harvest more
Yeah,
sunlight.
that's what
Mhm.
the plant
Yeah,
eats, so sunlight,
yeah,
in all the
right.
ways that matter. And I mean, the one thing I try to really stay on top of, if like sometimes you get so busy you can't do everything, but keeping the tomato branches off the ground, like just anything touching the ground, you just
Right.
almost cut it off like it has a cancer. Because first, I don't know, not exactly sure why, but it seems to not be good when the when the branches get against the ground.
Well, it's humid down there. You get more chance of disease,
Yeah.
and there's, as I said, ground-dwelling creatures. The slugs, turtles, all sorts of things can start munching on the leaves or the fruit.
You have turtles in your garden?
No, but I know I've read over the years of turtles. I think, yeah,
That would
yeah,
be cool. I mean, it would not be
yeah,
good, I
yeah,
suppose.
yeah. I'd sort of like to see a turtle in the garden.
Exactly. Okay. Um, okay, we already killed that question off. So I was going to ask best determinate and indeterminate variety for short growing seasons, not counting cherry tomatoes.
That's what I was going to say
I
because
know.
I don't actually look for short. To me, flavor is everything. So I just want to
Flavors, yeah.
grow for flavor. So I don't choose them for that. And I think some that I grow are probably earlier. Like there's one, I think, I shouldn't say this because I'm not 100% sure how early it is, but Carmelo
Carmelo?
is a really good one.
I'll write that down.
I should look that up right now.
Oh, God.
Well, there's three: Carmelo, Valencia, and I can't remember the third one. But they're really nice and seem like early-ish tomatoes.
They seem to
Early-ish.
seem like quicker than your other ones anyway.
And cherry tomatoes, I'm a big fan of. I don't know if you can grow sun gold up there.
Yeah, people grow those. Yep, I know
Yeah.
exactly what you're
And
talking about. Yeah.
to me, that's as good as any cherry tomato can be. One year, for an article I was writing for a gardening magazine, I was going to rate cherry tomatoes. So I grew 20 varieties of cherry tomatoes, and then I would taste them, and also friends and my daughter and my wife, and I remember one friend's commentary. She said that's one lousy row of tomatoes, because basically like 18 of them weren't good.
Really?
Yeah, cherry tomatoes are generally, if you go to not so much now, but years ago this was more the case. But if you went to, say, like if you at a salad bar in a restaurant and you have cherry tomatoes, compared to what you can grow, they're really bad.
I guess they're varieties that are chosen for shelf life and
Yeah, and
how
able to throw across the room without.
exactly. Oh, and I mean, when I'm choosing tomato varieties, it reminds me of when I was a student and I go to a restaurant and you'd read the menu from right to left. Like you look at the
Uh-huh.
price, you look at the prices, and then like there was like, anything I could find for like $5 that, and it's the same thing. I basically look, I don't read anything. I look at all the days to maturity and everything that's like 75 or less, and I choose from among those. Of course, when you're on the seed catalogs, they never say, "Oh, these taste like crap" or "These are bland." Um,
Yeah, you got to read between the lines. Like this is good for canning, but want a fresh tasting tomato. Not that what's interesting. I don't know if you're familiar with the variety San Marzano.
yes, yeah,
So that tomato, that was one, because I did another article once on canning tomatoes
right.
or plum tomatoes, and once again, 18 out of 20 were really bad, and the one that I knew was good, I didn't really even have to taste, was San Marzano. But San Marzano, to eat fresh, tastes like cotton, has no taste. But when you cook it, it has this that intense great tomato flavor.
That's it. I wouldn't have known that. But I've bought them in a tin. I've never grown them.
Yeah, yeah.
And I always tell my wife, "Don't. What have you done? Where's the San Marzanos?"
And actually, there were a couple of tomatoes that were really great eating tomatoes, and especially great for sauce. There was a variety called Anna Russian, which I'm sure is not a short season variety. Anna
Right.
Russian and Amish paste were really too good. Actually, you can do three things. We also dry a lot of tomatoes, so we dry those also.
I've heard of Amish paste. I swear I've seen that somewhere. So
It's very similar to Anna Russian.
okay, so it's a very low, probably had low, lot of like not as much water content as other.
Yeah, but not too low because it's really good tasting, fresh. In a
Right.
tomato sandwich, it's a great thing.
Oh, sounds like a perfect, yeah, because I do like to make tomato sauce. Most of our, you know, when you're trying to organize your garden, it has to be organized around what your family's going to eat. Otherwise, you have like all this. So, like when I first started growing my garden, I would grow a lot of the big fat beefsteak types because I like tomato sandwich. Um, but then what I end up doing is like eating tomato sandwiches at 10 o'clock at night and gaining, 1 pound a month. Um, because no one's eating them. I'm eating all this mayonnaise and bread and stuff like that. And I don't go cheap. I want like a lot of mayonnaise and I want a big, so growing those basically is the worst thing I could possibly do because I just end up eating a lot of bread and mayonnaise. So I realized like, we like tomatoes in a salad, more so my wife than myself. And tomato sauces is what everybody will eat. So
Right.
the garden needs to be heavier in the sort of Roma type, sauce paste type tomatoes, canning tomatoes, that sort of thing. Also for pickling, I'll do what's
Oh,
it called,
right.
lacto fermented tomato. I like doing that as well. I'd probably do a couple gallons of that every year as well.
Is that green tomato? You mean when they're green?
No, you take the red, a
Oh,
ripe Roma tomato, and you put it in a jar with salt water, and you
oh yeah.
leave it on the counter for about a week until it's all fizzy sort of thing. Then you put it somewhere cold, and
Yeah.
it makes its own vinegar. Um, some people like eating them whole like that. I like using those as an ingredient sort of thing. Like you basically made a vinegar out of the tomato, so the water with the salty vinegary sort of water has this unique and fermented. It's this unique flavor that adds to a lot of things. You put it in a pasta sauce, but it just has this unique flavor that you can add to your food
Yeah.
that no one else can buy. It's this
Uh-huh.
fermented tomato sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's just one more thing to do when you've got like, Jesus, what do I do with all these tomatoes? I'll just stick them in a jar and let them ferment on the counter. And once you've done that, you put it in the fridge and they're good for months, sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
So it buys you
Yeah.
some time, right? But some people say they just eat them right out of the jar like that.
Yeah.
All right, so that's good. That's some good varieties for people to look into. Okay, talk about the blossom end rot thing and how, people's ideas about what causes it and how to deal with it and what really causes it and how to really deal with it.
Right. So blossom end rot, if you grow tomatoes, you've probably seen it. It's basically you have a fruit and the end is sort of shriveled a little and just totally black spot on it that can expand. And that's actually from a calcium deficiency. And so people always think, okay, well, so add more lime to the soil or some other form of calcium. But it's not from a deficiency necessarily in the soil. It's from a deficiency of the calcium to get and stay in the fruit. And it turns out if you have, although where you are, can't imagine this happening that much because it's typically hot, dry conditions where you have a lot of transpiration, a lot of the water's going up to the leaves. And when that happens, it actually draws calcium away from the fruit towards the leaves. So the ways to deal with blossom end rot, one thing would be to make sure the plants are watered, so there's no water deficiency. And if you can, this would be a reason not to plant them necessarily to a single stem with a lot of air movement around them, because you don't want too much transpiration of the plant.
I see.
And then also different varieties, they vary in susceptibility to blossom end rot. And on the plus side, even if you have a tomato with blossom end rot, it's not some deadly disease that's going to affect you. You can just cut off the end and use the rest of the tomato.
Right, and also, like, just because your plant has produced a couple with that doesn't mean the successive yields are going to have that. I also think, especially here, a lot of people, like, they're waiting to get they get overzealous and they start their transplants now. And then, they can't plant them till like June. And so they're like 2 feet high and they got flowers on them, but they're growing in a little, something this size, right? Yeah. And so the plant has no roots. And then they harden off and stick it outside, and you've got this thing 2 feet high with, a tiny little root system. And it's got flowers it starts developing flowers indoors or in whatever, under artificial lights or whatever. So it's just I think they should just pluck off all those flowers when they plant them out.
Or better yet is not start them so early.
Oh, well, yes, of course.
A plant that started that early really does it might bear fruit and then just stop. That's, it's not really going to establish well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, no, that's another thing. I think a lot of gardeners, I think there's a question down here about when to start the transplant. So we don't want to kill the lead on that one. So let's save that one for later. Last question. What's the deal with Epsom salts? One thing I like to do is read Facebook pages and just read the questions people ask and the questions everybody else answers. There's no point in going into it because no one will agree with you anyway. But so anyone will say, oh, Bob, X is wrong with my tomato plants. What should I do? And they'll say, spray Epsom salts with water, spray them, water them with it, put all this Epsom. So, what is it?
People really consider Epsom salts to be this cure-all. And I was going to say, when we were talking about blossom end rot, that I was going to say the one thing not to do is give them Epsom salts. So Epsom salts are magnesium sulfate, so it doesn't supply calcium, it's magnesium. But something about people think there's some magic about Epsom salts. And whenever I hear this, I think of what I took a course in plant nutrition when I was in graduate school. And I remember when the teacher was talking about it, the professor, he said, yes, add Epsom salts to your soil if your soil is deficient in magnesium. So you don't just add Epsom salts. If there's not enough magnesium in the soil, this is a way to add magnesium. One way, it's not the only way. There's other ways to add magnesium also. So generally, if you see a recommendation to add Epsom salts, it's not true.
Yeah, so generally speaking, for tomatoes, it's not if you see a problem with your tomatoes, it's very unlikely. You may get a soil test, I suppose, and see if your soil's well. And
Yeah.
then what I mean, magnesium. I mean, it's not one of the big three because the plants
It,
only need tiny amounts, and it's very rare that a soil wouldn't have it.
well,
Um,
it's not a, there's the big three, which is one of the macronutrients, and then you have micronutrients. But magnesium is one of the macronutrients that's needed, but
right.
it's not this cure-all, and it's not like everybody's deficient in magnesium.
Okay, so that's all my questions. Um, Now we can start wading into the viewer, and I'm going to sort of, if I don't say the question exactly the way you wrote it, or if I don't pronounce your name correctly, apologies for that. If I, edit your question down, paraphrase, that's just because we're on camera here. So, so this one is from Cheryl Thomas, and the comment question is. If I start my tomatoes too early indoors and they get big before it's warm enough outside, will this affect their growth and production once they go outside?
So I think what'll happen is you'll get a few early tomatoes, and then the plant will shut down because it's not well, it's just sort of made a few tomatoes on what little resources it had and what little root system it had, but it put too much energy into that and didn't have time to establish its roots. So I would, yeah, better not to do that.
So there is a sweet spot for the timing. Um, I don't know if we have more questions about that. When would you say, I mean, where you are, when do you start your tomato transplants?
Well, I would say wherever you are, uh, first of all, it's easier to not start them earlier because you don't have to take care of them as long. But I start mine 6 weeks before the last frost date.
6 weeks before the last frost date. Yeah, that's a
And
good
then,
rule.
and that allows also, a couple of weeks for them to be hardened off before they're planted in the ground. So it's like 2 months altogether before they can actually be planted. The soil's warm enough for them to be planted.
Okay,
And
so
it's
for us,
nice.
that would be like end of March, early April for us here.
Well, that's same here.
Yeah.
And it's good because if you're going to be growing them, say, just in a sunny window, you get a lot of sun then versus if you're storing them in February or earlier than that, they're going to be all drawn out or etiolated and not good stocky plants. I mean, the idea is to have this plant that's really stocky when it's
Yes.
time to plant it out, uh, and you want the root ball to be in proportion to the tops. And what I always try and make it, about if you take like twice the height or 2 or 3 times the height of the plant, the root ball should be like it should be like two or three to one. So if the root ball's that much, I mean, if the plant is that high, the root ball should be one of those high, or one
Right.
and
So
eight.
the thing it's in the so if I got one of these, the tomato should be twice that high
Yeah, right.
around the time to plant. That's what
Better
you're saying.
said than the way I did.
All right. Next question is from Douglas Deaver. Says, I listened to his interview on the Joe Gardener podcast where he was talking about growing figs in cool climates, and I would be interested in hearing his thoughts on growing tomatoes under similar circumstances. Does that make any
Well,
sense to you?
it's a whole different plant because the figs are woody perennial plants, and tomatoes are annual herbaceous plants.
Right.
And one of the main challenges in growing figs in cold climates is to as far as if you have a climate that doesn't have a lot of heat or a lot of sun, such as you have, the figs, you want to choose a certain variety of fig and maybe plant it against a wall, a south-facing wall, other things that would increase heat and also work with the variety. But then the real challenge in growing figs in cold climates is to get them through winters. And there's various ways. In my book, I talk about 5 or more different methods for getting figs through various types of cold climates. You have the kind of climate where I am, where it's frigid winters, but hot long summers. But then you have maritime climates where it's sort of a cold. In the book, I call it a coldish winter, and but not a super hot summer.
Not so hot summer. Yeah.
Then you have mountain regions where you have frigid winters and cool summers. So, each one of those, you put together how you prune it, what varieties you choose, and how you bring it through the winter.
Right.
So it really doesn't relate to tomatoes.
No, because you're not bringing them through the winter.
Well, I guess the one way it sort of relates to tomatoes, just in the summer, you want good heat. So if you have a south-facing wall or a south-facing fence, you plant it near that, it's going to gather up more of the heat. And
I've been contemplating. This is sort of side mention to this. I mean, one of the challenges I have is there's, for the heat-loving things, I especially have a hard time with peppers and eggplant. Okay,
Right.
More so. I can get tomatoes to grow, but with a little bit of effort. But those things are really hard. And having some sort of dome or something like that over the plant works. But then there's exceptional days where it's just insane. You get a really sunny day and are really hot, and it risks the plant. And I've been thinking about putting transparent wall around the garden. I know all my gardens are in beds, like 4x8 beds sort of thing. So like a 2-foot high wall that's poly, right? So that there's less wind turbulence. There's still a bit of wind, but basically there should be warmer ambient air in there. So I was thinking of something like that where it can't get too hot, but it's going to be hotter there than anywhere else because you're sort of creating this little it's like a little phone booth sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on how high the wall is, and also how you get into it to harvest or don't forget that.
Yes,
and
yes.
And also what you mentioned, peppers. I actually like peppers a lot more than tomatoes, and I do have one variety that I've grown. I used to live in Wisconsin where it got super cold, and this is a variety that's been very successful for me. As far, with peppers, it's a problem not only in the heat to ripen them, but also they can drop flowers if it gets, depending on weather conditions, often if it gets too hot. And this variety that I grow is the most reliable pepper. And when I eat peppers, I only eat them when they're red, so I want to wait for them to turn red. So I highly recommend this variety, but I'm not going to say the variety. No, I'm kidding.
That's all right.
I saw you. The variety is called, Sweet Italian or Sweet Italia, or maybe just Italia.
Okay.
And I think it's a 70-day pepper to ripeness, maybe.
Okay.
But I always get tons of peppers, and they seem to set very well. The one downside to this variety, which is a downside to peppers generally, but this one seems more than others, it flops over, so you have to keep it up. It's trouble, you got a big load of fruit, and it just pulls the plant down.
Right. It's too productive for its own good.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Our next question is from Eagle Girl. What is the best way to fertilize tomatoes during the growing season, from plant to blooming fruit? Do you need a different fertilizer for each stage, or can you use the same one?
That's a good question. That's one of my pet peeves is that, and I think a lot of this has to do with marketing, where people think you need a special fertilizer when you plant it out, then you need a fertilizer during the growing season. I'm not saying those don't work, but I tend to keep things simpler. And first of all, in my vegetable gardens, which are very intensively planted for a very long season, I start under tunnels, I finish under tunnels. I use just one fertilizer, and it's an inch depth of finished compost.
Once a year. Kind of do the same thing, similar approach.
Once a year, because I used to use soybean meal and compost because I figured maybe it needed extra nitrogen, but then I made this calculation many times that 1 inch of compost or more should supply everything intensively planted vegetables would need for the whole season. Right. So if you don't have that much compost, so there's a lot of places to buy good compost now. If you don't have that, I would just put down some balanced fertilizer, preferably an organic fertilizer, and put it down in late fall.
What do you mean by balanced fertilizer? Give us some numbers, Lee.
I don't know. 5, 10, 5.
5, 10, 5. Okay.
10, 10, 10.
Okay.
1, 2, 3. 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
No, but the nice thing about compost, it really is like it's a balanced fertilizer. And the nice thing about it also is that the benefit is not only in the year that, you get a lot of reserve nutrients, and also you have all those benefits to the soil. You have benefits to the biology of the soil. You're really feeding soil microorganisms benefit, so that's good for diseases. And you're also improving the physical aspects of the soil. You get better water drainage, and you get better water holding too. So that's a
Right.
nice combination. So if you can do 1 inch of compost, that would be the best fertilizer. And you shouldn't really call it. It actually legally cannot be called a fertilizer. It's supposed to be. It's a soil amendment, but it does provide fertility. And what I like to do is do it in the fall, only because I have a lot to do in the spring, and anything I can reduce, any activity I can do in the fall, I'll do in the fall. But if you can't do it in the fall, just do it, anytime you can. And then after a few years, it's not that crucial when you do it because you have this big reserve. It's when you add compost to soil, you get a benefit the first year, you get some benefit the second year, third year. It goes on and on.
I think I had Robert Pavlis on the show talking about compost, and he said the stuff we consider soil that's coming out of our compost, that's still got 5 years of composting left to do. So it's still doing the magic. The magic goes on for years.
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay.
I should also mention when I add compost to the ground, a lot of people dig it in because they think the root has to get down to the roots. I just lay every year. I in my weedless gardening book that you mentioned earlier on, I promote no-till gardening, which it's not a religion, so there are reasons to till, depending on your particular situation, but you can garden without any tilling, especially if you're growing in beds such as you are and such as I am. And you get more bang for your buck with compost if you do not till it in, because being on the surface gives a lot of benefits also. It protects the soil from the impact of raindrops.
Right.
And also being the dark color, where you are, the dark color will warm up.
Absolutely.
And people often ask me, then they say, so how do you plant? And just make believe the compost is soil, because it is basically.
Soil in all the ways that matter.
Make a furrow, put the seeds in.
Pretty simple.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's amazing how simple everything gets if you just just leave it to take advantage of way a natural system works,
Right,
and put it to
exactly.
work in your garden. Yeah.
Right. Humans have this desire, I don't know why, to complicate things, and it's not necessary, and it's somewhat detrimental often.
Yeah. Okay. Next question is from the Hut. He says, I would be interested in methods to increase yields. Should suckers be pruned? Top pruning late in the season. I tried that this year. I actually did have a determinate Friday, and I top prune them. I mean, because it was the beginning of September, and we can get frost in September, so there was no point in having anything other than the fruit that was already set. Anyway, should top pruning late in season. Also interested in types recommended for a short growing season. We already covered that question.
Yeah.
But, okay, so yeah, methods to increase yields. Should suckers be pruned? Top pruning in late in season.
So the whole thing with pruning, where I described it to a single stake, that means you could plant more plants. You could get more plants in a given area because they could be closer, and you're getting this vertical aspect to the garden that you're making use of. So you can get greatest yields from well pruned plants grown to single stakes at say a foot apart. But you can also get good yields other ways, but not as good.
Yeah.
And yeah, so basically the maximum yield will be, that's why in greenhouse tomato production, they prune all the plants to a single stem.
I see.
So they're really trying, it's expensive to grow things in greenhouse, so they're trying to get, as many as they can per unit. So each plant, if you just put it on the ground, let it sprawl, you'll get more yield per plant, but from a given area, you'll get less yield. So you get less yield per plant, but more yield per square foot.
Per soil, yes.
Per square meter.
Per arable soil.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, and what about topping?
Topping, there's another of these things I read. I never saw the science behind it, and I did try it sometime years ago. I never saw, did you see a benefit? I never saw a benefit.
I didn't, I mean, I honestly, I did not have an experimental design sufficient to rule out type 1 error. Let's put it that way. So, I
Yeah, it's
mean,
hard, it's hard to be objective too.
I took
Since,
off, I took off everything except, I mean, so this was beginning of September. So I took off everything except parts of the plant that had a green tomato on it, right? Because I
oh,
wanted to get, because I didn't know if I had 2 weeks before frost or 3 weeks, because we get frost in September sometimes. This year we didn't, but sometimes we do, right?
did
So
you take off leaves also?
no, no, I took off height, basically like,
Oh, yeah,
I
yeah.
had lower
Right.
parts of the tomato that had fruit and then upper parts of the tomato that had flowers. And I just said, nope, this flower is never going to become anything, right?
I
So
guess
there's no point.
theoretically, this might not work, but theoretically, it seems that if you removed all the flowers but left all the leaves to grow, that would might do it also, because then you'd have more photosynthase
Yeah,
to the
that is
plant.
what I did. I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking. Like,
Oh,
okay,
but if you just cut them off, you cut off leaves and everything.
oh, you're saying the upper stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
maybe I should have just.
take off the flowers,
Ah, yeah,
but it might
yeah.
not work. It's, it's, it's theoretically, it seems like it has potential.
Someone needs to do a PhD on this, or
Right.
just a high school project. It's all it would take, if as long as they set up a decent design,
Right.
enough
Yeah.
observations.
Yeah, it
Good
would
old
not be that hard.
t-test is all that's needed. Um, okay, next question is from Garden Girl. Best tips for growing tomatoes in shorter seasons outside. I think we already killed that one off. I don't know if there's anything else to add to that other than what we already said. Um, Mark Sexton says cracking tomatoes. Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, that was a good one. Cracking tomatoes. I think that was originally one of my questions, and I removed it because this guy asked it. Mark Sexton, cracking tomatoes. Why? I'm trying to follow his punctuation. Why? I've I've tried more water, less water. It wasn't until fall that cracking stopped. Dot dot dot. And I live in the Mojave Desert of South SoCal. Is that Southern California?
Oh,
Is that
wow.
what that means? SoCal.
I don't
You're
know.
the American here. So I think
Um,
SoCal, SOCAL is like Southern California.
well,
I
the
think.
Mojave Desert, that would be Southern California.
Okay, yeah, between the two of us, we deciphered it. All right, so
I
yeah,
would I would say that cracking tomatoes, first of all, it can come mostly. Well, first of all, some varieties are more prone to cracking than others, and the other thing is variation in soil moisture. And when he said he tried watering them a lot or watering them a little, basically, if you, I would guess if you garden in that climate, you would have drip irrigation, which would keep a very even. I mean, even I have drip irrigation here, and it keeps a very even moisture level. But I think between a variety choice and even watering, and the most even watering you'll get is with drip irrigation.
right. And would the cracking be from getting too much water too quickly, or like a big rain after a drought sort of thing? Would
Right.
that it just
Yeah. Huh?
explode sort of thing?
Yep.
Yeah, I see. All right. And some varieties are just more, I guess,
Yeah.
less elastic than others, sort of thing. Or maybe it's just the rate they take up water. Maybe some
Yeah.
just really drink too deeply, too quickly. Okay, so we're almost done these. We just got a couple of questions left. These are our Facebook listeners. First is Brian Barnard. Says, I have always heard sweet potatoes are a southern crop. Oh, this is sweet potatoes. Damn. Okay, we're going to skip that one because it's not a tomato question.
They are
Um,
southern. They are a southern crop, and they need tons of heat.
yes, I tried growing them here once, and I did get a sweet potato from one sweet potato crop. Uh, so I'm sure you could devote a greenhouse to it. But man, you'd really have to like your sweet potatoes too.
Yeah. They grow long vines.
Yes. Um, Curtis Wilkerson, spring fever has arrived in my part of the world, Central Texas. Oh, I wouldn't even
Wow.
know what that means. Um, so your podcast is perfectly timed. Tomatoes won't be planted outside for another few weeks, but you can go ice fishing where I am. Um, Tomatoes won't be planted outside for another few weeks, but potatoes, onions, spinach, other cool crops are in the ground. That's not a question. All right. Thanks for your comment, Curtis. uh,
He's just trying to make us feel bad.
yeah, I think he's just rubbing our noses in it. Donna Doucette, I am curious on his take on watering methods. Of course, soil conditions equally important. Water can be a real issue, lack of. I hear watering thoroughly once weekly is better than a little each day. Okay, this is a great question for you.
Well, watering thoroughly once weekly is a great idea if you're watering with a sprinkler or by hand. And it takes a long time to water thoroughly because you have to put down the equivalent of enough water to wet the soil about 6 inches deep, which takes on average maybe an inch depth. If you had a can and there's a sprinkler on, the can would fill with an inch of water. But to me, the ideal way to water, which is both good for the plant and saves water, is with drip irrigation. Drip irrigation typically saves 60% of water over sprinkler irrigation.
Are your hoses under the ground or are they just laying on the ground?
When I first did it many years ago, I did it underground, and then it was sort of like when I put a trowel in the ground, every once in a while it was like I struck oil, of the water. So now I do it on top of the ground, not only for that reason, but also because one thing about drip irrigation, it's a very easy to set up and it works great and everything, but you do have to check it every once in a while, make sure. I like to see the line
functioning.
Yeah, just to make sure, because things happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm a big fan of drip irrigation. It's I know sometimes when we've had a droughty summer, and people in town, they know that I'm a big gardener, and they ask me how my garden is, and they probably think I'm going to start moaning and groaning how bad it is. It's like great because I got all the water just through drip irrigation and bright sunlight and heat, and yeah.
That's true. I mean, I guess the very conditions that cause a drought are ideal for growing if you've got enough water.
Yeah, and if water is limiting, drip irrigation makes, as I said, much more efficient use of it.
That makes, yes, yeah. If you were somewhere where it cost money or there's, sort of conservation, or if your well is at risk. Are you on a well or are you on?
Yeah, I'm on a well. And when I first moved here, I had a sprinkler on once, and it was a droughty summer, and I have a shallow well. It's only 11 feet deep.
Wow.
It's what's called a dug well. It's 4-foot concrete rings, but I live on a road called Springtown Road, so there's a lot of springs there, so it recharges quite quickly. But when I had a sprinkler on, I accidentally drew it down too fast and it dried out. But in an hour it'll recharge. But now I have much more on drip irrigation and it never dries out.
Right, because you're
not
losing it through evaporation to the same extent.
Well, also the thing is with a sprinkler irrigation, or this once a week irrigation, which is recommended, when you first put the water down, you're actually flooding the soil with water, which means all the pores are filled up, and roots do need oxygen to function. So the roots don't take up a lot of that water, and then gravity drains all the weakly held out of the soil, and then the plant's happy because then there's air in the soil, and then eventually, the plants can't get any more water out of the soil, so they're suffering from drought a little, and then you water it again, presumably because it's the weak. But the plant is going through this feast and famine cycle, and you're wasting all that water. Not to mention, you're also, with a sprinkler, it's very democratic. It spreads water everywhere, like not necessarily only where you want plants to be. So drip irrigation is more pinpointing. As you can tell, I'm a big fan of drip irrigation.
That's my challenge in my garden. I mean, I've got walking paths and beds, and sprinkler doesn't make any sense because
right.
I'd be watering my walking paths for the most part, and I'd have to move it all the time.
Yeah, and you'd be helping weeds grow in the paths.
I'd be helping, and my garden, the walking paths, I put sand down. I just had this idea of turning the walking paths into a desert and the beds into an oasis, and And one of the side, I mean, the reason I started doing it was because I got worried about ticks, because we have ticks here, and
Uh-huh.
I have young kids and stuff like that. And I had a tick expert on the show, and I was asking her about sand, and she said ticks hate sand, right?
Oh,
Because they don't like dry environments, right? And the sand dries out very fast. Even after the most incredible rain, it's dry in an hour. You know, it just the water
how,
goes right.
how deep is the sand?
Oh, like 5 inches. You know,
Oh, wow.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, originally the walking paths were mulched beds, and so if anything actually starts growing, it grows really well because there's like beautiful black earth underneath all that sand, right? Um, but and actually this year I have to replenish it because I grew it over this springy, beautiful soil, so it still keeps. I almost should have put like crusher dust down then sand.
Yeah.
Um, but the good thing about having sand is that if any over that soft stuff is that if anything does start growing it, I can pull it out no problem because it's so soft underneath.
Right.
But one of the side benefits of the sand is that it's a heat sink,
Huh.
right? So like I can go outside and there's snow on the ground and my walking paths are completely thawed, right?
Hmm.
The water doesn't accumulate on them. The water goes down through, and because I mean, they're not black, but they're darker than snow, right?
Right.
And in the spring, in the earlier season, you can feel like when you walk from my lawn to the garden, you can feel this heat because you think about it, it's like a big rock that's soft.
Well,
You know,
it's also because it's not holding water, and water, has this heat capacity. So if you have a moist soil, won't change temperature as quickly as a dry soil.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that, this would as the temperature warms in the spring, the wet soil is still retaining some of winter's cold, whereas the sand can change more quickly.
Well, and I view the pathways as being almost like they were concrete. I mean, it is like it is rocks, right? Sand
Yeah.
is rocks.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
so it's basically I have a garden surrounded with rocks,
Yeah.
and rocks hold heat, even if it's sand, right? So you can be out there, and it's like, and so it just creates this weird little microclimate back there, and it's helped a lot. I mean, it doesn't solve my not enough sunlight problem, but on a day when it is sunny, everything gets warmed up, and it's really sort of solved some of my early spring issues with the garden, just getting things happening a lot better. And there's no amount of heat that's enough heat here, so we'll just can't
Right.
get overheated here. It's just not warm enough for that. So it wouldn't work for certain parts of the world. It would just might get like crazy hot. But for here, it seems to. So it's one of the side benefits. I did it mainly to have a sort of slightly weed proof, mostly tick
Right.
proof sort of situation. It looks cool too. It looks kind of neat.
Yeah.
Um,
The main problem seems it's heavy stuff.
Now, so you hire a young guy to do it.
Oh yeah.
So like
Right.
a dump truck dumps it off, and then I put an ad on and then get some guy who's like 18 and big
Right.
muscles like a wrestler. And yeah, I'm
And
amazed at
and then you say, "I bet you can't move all that sand."
I pay him, but it's humbling to watch a teenager outperform you. Uh,
Right. They
you know,
get used to it.
well, and he's like, "What are you doing tonight?" "Oh, I'm going to go play hockey." I'd be like wrecked, if I did a third of what that guy's doing, I'd be wrecked for a week, you know. So well, that's my solution, until my kids are old enough to move that kind of weight, wheelbarrow fulls of sand. But I think this year's a year where I'm going to have to redo it. I'd love to find some black sand. That would
Oh
really get
yeah.
some heat going. Oh man. Anyway, so that's killed off all our questions. Lee, thanks for coming on the show. Um, Everybody out there, if you enjoy what the podcast and you want to help support everything I'm doing here, check out my sponsor, SCCs. Go to their website, use my coupon code GAVS22. You get free shipping as long as there's a pack of seeds in your order. This is the time of year you want to start thinking about seeds. So, or anything else. I mean, they sell hats, they sell pesticides, they sell trials, they sell all the other stuff. So, as long as there's a pack of seeds in your order and you haven't got an oversized item like a rototiller, you'll get free shipping. So, and that means you can buy blueberries, strawberries, apple tree whips. That is all within the category of free shipping stuff.
Wow.
So it adds up, right? So, and Americans, you can buy things from Vessi Seeds. You just can't buy as many things. our soil cannot touch your soil. So
Do we get free shipping?
yes, yes,
Wow.
as far as I understand it, you'll get free shipping as long. So when you go to their website, there's a thing near the top right that has a flag. So there's a Canadian flag. There's a little thing you click there, and you click on the American flag, and that shows you what you can buy. Like, so you couldn't buy like potatoes because they have dirt
Right.
on them,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And there's certain kinds of seeds that I don't know why, but you can't order
Yeah.
them into the United States for whatever reason. And I'm not sure about, I'm talking about apple tree whips and stuff like that. I don't know if those fall into the category as well.
Yeah.
Been really trying hard to find an American partner that is like Vessi Seeds, similar sort of mom and pop-ish type company. But there's a lot of work goes into convincing them you're not nuts and getting them to take you on as a partner. But I mean, half my YouTube audience is in the United States.
Yeah.
And they can't, they can buy things from Vessi Seeds, and a lot of them do, and it's great. But it'd be great to get an American partner that they could buy anything they want from. I'm always looking around. That's just, I send out, emails all the time trying to convince someone to give my viewers a deal and, give me a little money too. So hopefully we'll figure that out. Anyway, Lee, thanks for coming on the show. We'll definitely have you on again. And, really, it's been a couple of years since we had you on the show. So
Yeah.
but for those of you, go to, there's links to Lee's website in the description box of this video, or in the write-up. If you're on the podcast website, I'll get information on his books, a link to his website. People can buy their books from you right on your website, right?
Actually, it costs a fortune for some reason to ship to Canada, so you buy them from somebody in Canada.
Like Amazon?
Yeah, or a bookstore, whatever.
Or a bookstore? What? What's a bookstore?
No, but the usual places in Canada, except I unfortunately can't ship to Canada.
Okay.
I mean, I can, but it costs like $30 for a book or something.
I noticed that like years ago, I remember in the early 2000s, I used to buy things on eBay from the United States, especially fishing gear. I could get the greatest deals, like fly rods for $5, and then at some point, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, it became impossible to buy things from the United States.
Huh.
It's not that it's impossible. I just, for whatever reason, it became impossible. It's so costly for them to ship to Canada. It wasn't worth them selling to us. And I don't know what changed. I don't quite understand it, but boy, it was fun while it lasted. Oh God. Anyway, that's the end of the show, everybody. Thanks for watching. Lee, we'll have you on again. Great having you on the show. Thanks for coming on.
Been great being on it. I'll go have my dinner now.
Everybody, until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden.